Tom Bedouin, in his book Virtual Faith, shares the story of a professor playing Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech when he was in college in the 70s, and the professor saying class is done and breaking down crying, and Tom Bedouin confessing, I've experienced that at plays and albums. I experienced that with my friends at the musical Rent. But I've never experienced the shared passion of something worth living, something worth dying for. Bedouin asks, what is there for people in our world today that we know is worth dying for? Too often I'm worried that what we witness today is the concern that we're not sure what's worth living for. It showed its face in the most extreme way on April 20th, 1999. On that day, two young men whose names I'm sure you'll remember, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, who had spent months making bombs, doing target practice, studying diagrams of Columbine High School, woke up that morning and executed a vicious plan. Eric and Dylan were so convinced that nothing was worth living for that they turned that hatred, that hopelessness into an aggressive onslaught and committed the Columbine Massacre. They marched into Columbine High School and killed 12 fellow students and one teacher, stalking room to room, heartlessly taking lives. Their hearts were swallowed by despair. I can't help but think that existentially they felt orphaned. I can't help but think that they felt that whoever had made this world this way had left them alone, without a parent, without a helper, without a shred of hope. So convinced were they of these vicious feelings that they decided anyone who had found something worth believing in needed to be punished. A story arose that's been almost canonized from that day. Perhaps you know it. The story of Cassie Bernal. Cassie Bernal was a 16-year-old young lady, child like any, a young girl like any of our 16-year-olds, like any of us. And on that day, when Dylan and Eric marched into the library where the largest massacre occurred, one of the two boys has been reported to have walked up to Cassie. Cassie had found something worth living for. And apparently everybody knew it. Kathy was a Christian, a disciple, a follower of Christ, who had committed her life to the passionate pursuit of something worth living for. And in the sickest moment, perhaps, of the whole thing, one of them, either Eric or Dylan, walked up to her, put a gun to her head, and said, "If you deny Jesus, I will let you live." Cassie refused to deny Jesus. When we hear the story of Stephen, as we did earlier, martyred because he was preaching about the passion of the gospel, or Cassie, who stands up for Jesus, what I seek today to celebrate is not their martyrdom or their death. Kenda Creasy Dean, in her book, Practicing Passions, shares a story that I remember well because I was youth directing at the time that this happened, that for months after the story of Cassie came out, youth groups were abuzz with the question, did you hear about Cassie? Would you die for your faith? And she's right. That was the question. Would you die for your faith? But Kenda pushes us. She says it isn't about finding something worth dying for. The reality is that if you find something so good, so sweet, so true, so deep that it's worth dying for, you better bet, you can believe it's worth living for. What those young high school students were wondering when they asked, "Would you die for your faith?" was not, "Are you ready to die for something?" It was, "Is there anything worth living for?" In theological education, the mistake that we have made has been focusing too much on the fact that there is a particular In some way, the promise that Jesus makes to us in baptism, that we are His, that He has prepared a room for us, and that we will one day be home with Him, is a promise that He will not fulfill until our funeral days. But that promise, if we believe it, that we are clean, that we are His, that God has conquered death with love, that is a promise so sweet that if we believe it, if we are claimed by it, it isn't just about something worth dying for. It is about the thing worth living for. A faith, a hope, a love, a life so big, so powerful that it could change this whole world. You see, in theological education, we sometimes believe that faith is about some obligatory thing. Because I believe I ought to go to Bible study. Good people go to church. People like me go to worship. The reality is that faith isn't an obligation. Faith is supposed to be about falling in love. Falling in love with God, with Jesus. Falling in love with life and with the world that God has made for us. Education is about drawing out of us together an identity that falls in love with God, brand new, every day. Theological education is about finding the ways and places that we can get close enough to each other, close enough to the Holy Spirit that Jesus sent to us, that we will not feel orphaned. No. That each and every day we might know a life worth living for, even dying for, and that we might live that life even in the most orphaned, confusing moments together. Theological education is about shaping the people we are into the people we wish to be. And that's something we can only do together. On this day, we give thanks to the leaders who the Holy Spirit has called to advocate for us, to help us, to lead us. But on this day, we are also called ourselves to hear again